while we're on the AI topic, that was segue back. Do you think OpenAI should be allowed to be a for-profit?
So this is one of those things where you kind of always wonder if there's sort of two realities. There's two Earths, and you wonder which Earth you're on. Because like on Earth 1, there are very clear laws on this, and this has to do with federal tax law and among other legal regimes. And there are a lot of different ways in which somebody can inappropriately sort of cross the line with what they do with the economic value of a nonprofit. And, historically, in the US, when you cross those lines, you go to jail. Somebody who absconds with or hijacks or misappropriates or inappropriately leverages a nonprofit for personal wealth, that's like a absolute, like, put it this way, you or I do it, we're going to jail.
Yep.
Right? Like, I hope our friends visit us, we're going to be in jail. Then on Earth 2, it's like maybe you can do whatever you want. Right? Yeah. And like, YOLO. Right? And like, why not? And if you don't like your this or that or whatever, you just go ahead and do it. And who knows, see what happens. And I think this is one of those. Right. So, I'll just give you the very specific thing and not just, I'm trying not to get too specific on OpenAI, but just in general to your question, like the idea of a nonprofit becoming a for-profit, there actually is a legal regime in the US through which that can happen. It does occasionally happen. The usual scenario, by the way, historically is hospitals where they start out as nonprofits and then at some point they become for-profits. And the way that happens is you have to create a new for-profit company de novo from scratch. And then you have to raise money to buy the assets in the nonprofit at their fair market value. Right. And so if the nonprofit owns a hospital that's worth $100 million, then to turn that hospital into for-profit, you have to create a for-profit, you have to raise $100 million and buy the hospital. And then at least in theory, that you're now clean when you do that. By the way, the people involved in the nonprofit very much cannot be the recipient of the money on the other side, because that would be, again, a sort of absconding, with corporate resources, with the resources of the nonprofit. But you can do that so that those transitions can happen. But, hypothetically, if you had a nonprofit that was worth $150 billion, it raises this interesting question, which is, number one, do you need to do any of this, or can you just YOLO it? But like, if you're going to try to do it by the book, do you basically create a new for-profit, and then do you go raise $150 billion in cash, right, to buy that thing out, right? Or, do you try to figure out some theory under which it's actually not worth $150 billion, even though, like what's it worth? And then again, you're right back in tax law territory. And then again, the third rail is 100% that you can't, none of that money can go to you. And so this is a really good test. It's going to be a good test for the IRS. By the way, the California State Attorney General has oversight over this. There's a variety of, this is a potent enough topic area with enough just nonprofits. There's always government scrutiny on nonprofits because there's all kinds of ways that people try to siphon money out and they get the tax break. And so they're actually quite sensitive to this, and a bunch of different branches of state and federal government get focused on this. Then there's the other thing, which is whatever happens here will be a precedent. And the precedent is actually quite interesting because if, let's just say hypothetically, there's a YOLO and the YOLO works, it will set a very interesting precedent because, and again, just think basic incentives. If Andreessen Horowitz could instead, because we fund all of our companies, it's actually really funny. We call them unintentional nonprofits.
When they don't make profit, yeah.
Like, they're Delaware C corporations. They just, they're not technically, you understand they don't make money. Yeah. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. They are legally for-profits, and we invest in them as a for-profit. And, we invest in them using taxable money, and the returns that come out of it are taxable and so forth. If in the alternate scenario, if we live on Earth 2 instead, what we would do is we would not do that. What we would do is all startups would start out as 501c3s, right? Yeah. And so you basically, and the reason for that is the funding then would come in and it would be a tax deductible. And so you would start a foundation that would basically make these things on a tax deductible basis. You get the tax credit for it, which would be much more capital efficient. And then if they don't work, it's just a charitable deduction that you've gotten the tax credit on. And if they do work, you YOLO and you flip it into being a for-profit, and off and away you go. The precedent that is going to be set here is going to determine, potentially a lot of how basically startup formation happens and a lot of what people like us do. And, I would just let me hypothesize that I don't think there are very many elements of the political system that want people like me to be able to just nakedly evade federal tax law. And so I suspect that some of these things are not maybe going to be quite as easy as people might think.
And normally when you have an aggrieved funder who gave money to such a thing but didn't get upside, you would just settle and, give him a chunk of equity or something. But when that person happens to be the wealthiest person in the world and also has started a different company in the space, perhaps there's no amount of equity or nothing that can be given that would inspire such a settlement. So it would be interesting to see what happens.
But again, I think that's all right. But again, there might be an even deeper problem. And I'm not a lawyer, so don't take this, for granted. I would say double check this with Claude before you make any legal decisions. But through Claude Esquire. But I'm not sure that I'm not sure they can just. I'm not sure that a nonprofit that has taken a tax deductible donation can turn around and settle with a chunk of equity in a for-profit.
Right.
Like, I think that in and of itself might actually. I would be surprised if that were even permissible. And
well,
again,
unless we're in the YOLO world where it's whom and just
yeah. Maybe that's a YOLO, right? Maybe every time I donate to a nonprofit now, I can hope that in the future some chunk of for-profit equity comes back to me. Like, yeah, why not? My mental model of the IRS is that they'll never permit this to happen, and the California AG will never permit this to happen. But it's like I said, maybe we need a good civics lesson now and then, and so we'll see. We'll see who's minding the store.